A saloon girl with nothing but lint in her pockets paid for a stranger's breakfast, never knowing he was the wealthiest man in the Arizona Territory, searching for someone worth leaving his fortune to. What started as a simple act of kindness in a dusty frontier saloon would change both their lives forever. This is the story of Rose McKenna, a woman who had every reason to look away, but chose to see a man when no one else would. And what he did for her in return, well, you'll have to hear it to believe it. The morning sun blazed through the dust-caked windows of the Dusty Rose Saloon in Redemption Gulch, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. The smell of stale whiskey mixed with frying bacon as the handful of early risers nursed their coffee and nursed their hangovers in equal measure. Outside, a hot wind kicked up desert sand, swirling it down the dirt road like restless ghosts. The door swung open with a creak, and every head turned. An old man stepped inside, and the word pitiful didn't even begin to cover it. His clothes were little more than rags stitched together with hope and horsehair. His hat had more holes than brim, his boots were held together with twine, and his face, weathered, sunburned, and covered in a week's worth of gray stubble, told the story of a man who'd been riding hard and sleeping rough. He shuffled toward the bar, his steps slow and deliberate, like a man trying not to collapse. His eyes, pale blue and tired, scanned the chalkboard menu hanging crooked on the wall. Tucker, the bartender, a stocky man with slicked-back hair and a mean streak wide as the Rio Grande, looked him up and down like he was examining a mangy dog. "Help you?" Tucker asked, arms crossed, voice flat. The old man cleared his throat. Just a plate of eggs and bacon, if you got it, and some coffee. Black?" Tucker smirked. "That'll be 4 bits." The man reached into his coat pocket, then his trouser pockets, patting himself down with increasing urgency. His face went pale beneath the sunburn. He swallowed hard. I must have left my coin pouch back at camp," he said quietly, shame creeping into his voice. "If I could just sit a spell Till you what?" Tucker cut him off, louder now, drawing the attention of the other patrons. "Till you magically grow some money?" "This ain't a charity house, old man. No coin, no food. Simple as that." A snicker rose from a corner table where 2 regulars, Dutch and Cole, sat grinning like coyotes. "Look at that," Dutch drawled, tobacco staining his teeth. "A drifter too broke to even buy himself breakfast. What's next, gonna ask for a free shave and a bed, too?" Cole slapped the table, laughing. "Hell, maybe he's looking for someone to adopt him. Poor old coot probably ain't got a friend in the world." The old man's shoulders sagged. He turned toward the door, his face burning red, not from the sun, but from humiliation. "I'm sorry to trouble you folks," he muttered. "I'll be on my way." From across the room, Rose McKenna stood frozen, a tray of empty plates balanced in her hands. She was 26, with dark auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, and eyes the color of strong whiskey. Her dress was faded calico, mended at the elbows, and her hands were rough from years of hard work. She'd seen this before, too many times, the mockery, the cruelty, the way people kicked a man when he was already down, just because they could. Her jaw tightened. She set the tray down with a sharp clatter and reached into the pocket of her apron. Her fingers closed around the few coins she had left. Money she'd been saving for May's medicine. 4 bits. Exactly what the old man needed. Without a word, Rose crossed the saloon floor, her boots tapping against the wood. She walked right up to the bar and slapped the coins down in front of Tucker. "That's for his breakfast," she said, her voice steady and clear. Tucker blinked. "Rose, what the hell are you—" "I said, that's for his breakfast." The room went quiet. Tucker stared at the coins, then at Rose, his face twisted in disbelief. "You're seriously paying for this bum?" Rose didn't flinch. "I'm paying for a man's breakfast. Now cook it." Dutch leaned back in his chair, grinning wide. "Well, ain't that sweet? Rose playing the angel again. You gonna tuck him in at night too, darling? Cole whistled low. Maybe she's hoping he's got a hidden fortune somewhere. That it, Rose? You gambling on a jackpot? Laughter rippled through the saloon, harsh and cutting. Rose turned to face them, her eyes blazing. You boys got a real talent for kicking a man when he's down. Must make you feel real big, huh? Real powerful? Dutch's grin faltered slightly. This man came in here hungry, Rose continued, her voice rising. He asked for food like any decent person would. And what did he get? Mockery, shame, being treated like he's worth less than the dirt on your boots. She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes that dared to hold her gaze. Every single one of you has been down on your luck at some point. Every one of you has needed help, but the moment someone else needs it, you act like vultures circling a carcass. The room fell silent. Even Tucker shifted uncomfortably behind the bar. Rose turned back to the old man, her expression softening. Sir, please, have a seat by the window. Your breakfast will be ready shortly. The old man stood there, his eyes glistening. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally, he managed a single, trembling nod. Thank you, miss, he whispered, his voice cracking. You didn't have to do that. Rose offered him a small, genuine smile. Yes, I did. He made his way to the table by the window, moving like a man who'd just been given back a piece of his dignity. Tucker muttered something under his breath and disappeared into the kitchen. The sizzle of bacon soon filled the air. Rose returned to her work, gathering plates and refilling coffee, but she could feel the weight of every stare in the room. Some were judgmental, others were curious. A few, surprisingly, held something that looked almost like respect. When the plate was ready, Rose carried it over herself. Eggs cooked just right, crispy bacon, a thick slice of bread, and a steaming mug of black coffee. She set it down gently in front of the old man. Here you go, sir. Take your time. He looked up at her, and for a moment, his weathered face seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. You've got a kind heart, miss, he said quietly. Rarer than gold out here. Rose shrugged. Kindness doesn't cost much, just requires someone to give a damn. She started to turn away, but he spoke again. What's your name? She paused. Rose McKenna. He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. I won't forget this, Miss McKenna. I promise you that. Rose gave him a polite nod and walked back toward the bar. Behind her, she heard Tucker's voice, low and venomous. You're a fool, Rose. That money could have gone toward something useful. Instead, you waste it on some nobody who will be dead in a ditch by sundown. Rose didn't respond. She didn't need to. As the old man ate in silence by the window, the other patrons slowly returned to their conversations, though the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter was quieter now, the jokes fewer, and in the corner, Dutch and Cole exchanged glances, their earlier bravado gone. When the old man finished his meal, he stood slowly, placed his battered hat on his head, and walked toward the door. As he passed Rose, he tipped his hat to her, his eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. May the Lord bless you, Miss McKenna, he said softly, and may you never lose that fire. Then he stepped out into the blazing Arizona sun and disappeared down the dusty street. Rose watched him go, unaware that her life had just changed forever. The rest of Rose's shift passed like dragging a wagon through mud, slow, heavy, and exhausting. The whispers followed her from table to table, soft enough that she couldn't make out the words, but loud enough to know they were about her. Tucker barely spoke to her for the rest of the morning, which suited her just fine. When he did acknowledge her, it was with cold glares and heavy sighs, the kind meant to remind her she'd crossed a line. By the time the noon rush ended, Rose's feet ached and her head throbbed. She untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the kitchen, and was halfway to the door when Hank Boudreau's voice stopped her cold. Rose, my office. Now. Her stomach sank. Hank Boudreau owned the Dusty Rose Saloon, and he ran it like a tyrant ran a kingdom, with an iron fist and no patience for anything that disrupted his profit. He was a barrel-chested man with a thick black mustache and eyes like chips of coal. Rose followed him into the cramped back office that smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. He closed the door behind her and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "You want to tell me what that little stunt was this morning?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Rose kept her chin up. "I paid for a man's breakfast, that's all." "That's all?" Hank's voice rose. "You embarrassed my bartender in front of paying customers. You made a scene, and for what? Some drifter who'll be gone by sunset?" "He was hungry, Hank, and he was being treated like dirt." "That ain't your problem." Hank slammed his hand on the desk. "Your job is to serve drinks, clear tables, and keep your head down, not play savior to every down-and-out fool who wanders through that door." Rose's jaw tightened. "So I'm supposed to just stand there and watch? Pretend I don't see it?" "Yes," Hank barked. "That's exactly what you're supposed to do. This is a business, Rose, not a charity house. You cost yourself 4 bits today for a man you'll never see again. 4 bits you could have used for your sister's medicine." The mention of May hit like a punch to the gut. Rose looked away, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Hank's voice softened, but only slightly. "Look, I know you got a good heart, but good hearts don't pay rent. They don't keep food on the table. You keep pulling stunts like this, and I'll have no choice but to let you go. You understand me?" Rose swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Now get out of here. And Rose," he pointed a thick finger at her, "remember your place." She left without another word. The walk back to her cabin felt longer than usual. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the wind carried dust that stung her eyes. By the time she reached the small, weathered structure on the edge of town, her throat was dry and her spirit felt just as parched. Inside, the cabin was dim and stifling. May lay on the narrow cot in the corner, wrapped in a thin blanket despite the heat. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. "Rose," May's voice was barely a whisper. Rose knelt beside her, brushing a damp strand of hair from her sister's forehead. "I'm here, May." "How you feeling?" "Tired," May murmured, "always tired." Rose's heart twisted. May was only 19, but illness had stolen her youth, leaving behind a frail shadow of the bright, lively girl she used to be. "I'll get your medicine soon," Rose promised, though she had no idea how. The 4 bits she'd spent that morning had been the last of her savings. May's eyes fluttered open, studying her sister's face. "You look troubled. What happened?" Rose hesitated, then told her everything. The old man, the humiliation, her decision to help, and Hank's warning. May was quiet for a long moment. Then, with surprising strength, she reached out and took Rose's hand. "You did the right thing," May said softly. Rose shook her head. "Maybe. But it might cost us everything." "Maybe," May echoed. "But some things are worth more than safety, Rose. Mama taught us that." Rose thought of their mother, dead 5 years now, who used to say that the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they gave when they had nothing left to give. She squeezed May's hand gently. That night, as May slept, Rose sat by the window, staring out at the dark expanse of the frontier. Somewhere out there, that old drifter was sleeping under the stars, his belly full because of her. She had no regrets, not one, forgettable. Rose kept her head down at the saloon, served drinks without complaint, and endured Tucker's smug glances and Hank's watchful eye. May's condition hadn't improved, and Rose's coin pouch remained stubbornly empty. But she worked, and she survived, and she told herself that was enough. It was mid-afternoon when everything changed. The saloon was quiet, just a handful of patrons nursing warm beers and playing cards. Rose was wiping down tables when the door swung open, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine black suit with a silk vest and a perfectly blocked Stetson. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, and a gold watch chain glinted at his waist. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, his jaw clean-shaven, and his presence commanded the room without him saying a single word. Rose froze, the rag still in her hand. She knew those eyes, pale blue, weathered at the corners, carrying the same weight she'd seen 5 days ago. It was him, the old drifter. But he looked nothing like the broken man who'd shuffled through that door begging for breakfast. This man looked like he owned the world, and maybe he did. Tucker straightened behind the bar, suddenly attentive. Welcome, sir. What can I get you?" The man didn't even glance at him. His eyes were locked on Rose. He walked across the saloon floor with measured steps, his boots echoing in the silence, and stopped directly in front of her. "Miss McKenna," he said, his voice steady and refined. No trace of the trembling whisper from before. Rose's mouth went dry. Yes? May I have a word with you?" Privately, every eye in the room was on them now. Tucker's jaw hung open. Dutch and Cole sat frozen at their table, cards forgotten. Rose nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. The man gestured toward an empty table in the corner. She followed, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Rose found her voice. You're not what you seemed." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "No, ma'am. I suppose I'm not." "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to know the answer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather card case, sliding a card across the table. Rose picked it up with trembling fingers. James Calloway, Calloway Holdings, railroads, cattle, mining claims, Arizona Territory. Her eyes widened. "Calloway? You're the James Calloway?" Everyone in the territory had heard the name. Calloway owned half the land between Tucson and the New Mexico border. Railroads ran on his steel. Cattle bearing his brand filled every stockyard from here to Santa Fe. Men had killed for a fraction of what he possessed. "I am," he said simply. Rose set the card down, her mind reeling. "But why? Why did you come in here dressed like a beggar?" He finished for her, his expression unreadable. "Because I needed to know." "Know what?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "My wife died 12 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. We never had children. After she passed, I threw myself into work, into building, into acquiring. I thought it would fill the emptiness." His voice grew quieter. It didn't. Rose listened, her heart pounding. "Over the years, I've been surrounded by people," he continued. "Business partners, investors, politicians, even family. But every single one of them saw the same thing. My money, my land, my power. Not me, never me." He looked down at his hands. "So I started traveling. Anonymously. Dressed in rags, carrying nothing. I wanted to see who people really were when there was nothing to gain, when kindness had no reward." Rose's throat tightened. "I've been to 12 towns, Miss McKenna. Been turned away from twice as many establishments. Been mocked, spat on, and kicked to the curb." He met her eyes again. "And in all that time, only one person saw me as a human being worth defending." Rose's breath caught. "You didn't help me for recognition," he said softly. "You didn't help me expecting anything in return. You helped me because it was right, and in doing so, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Rose whispered. "Hope," he said. "Hope that decency still exists in this world." Rose stared at him, words catching in her throat like tumbleweeds on a fence post. Finally she managed, "I didn't do anything special, Mr. Calloway. I couldn't stand by and watch." "That's exactly what makes it special," he replied. "Most people can. Most people do." She shook her head slowly. "You came in here pretending to be someone else. You tested me. Tested everyone. No, James said firmly. I didn't test you. I simply existed. You made your choice entirely on your own. Rose looked away, her emotions tangled. Part of her felt deceived. Another part understood something deeper in his words. Why are you telling me this, she asked. Why me this, she asked. Because I owe you the truth, he said, and because I have a question I'd like to ask you. She met his gaze again, wary. Why did you help me, he asked. You clearly didn't have money to spare. Your coworkers mocked you. Your boss likely reprimanded you. So why? Rose was quiet for a long moment, staring at the worn table between them. Then she spoke, her voice distant, as if reaching back through time. When I was 12, she began, my father died in a mining accident. Left my mama with 2 daughters and debts she couldn't pay. We lost everything, our home, our belongings, our place in town. James listened without interruption. We ended up living in a wagon on the edge of Prescott. Mama took in washing, mending, anything she could, but it was never enough. One winter, May got sick, real sick. Mama didn't have money for a doctor, let alone medicine. Rose's hands clenched on the table. We went to the company doctor, the one who worked for the mine. Begged him to see May. He looked at us, dirty, desperate, broke, and he said, I don't treat charity cases. Come back when you can pay. Her voice hardened. May nearly died that winter. Would have if it weren't for an old prospector named Samuel. He had nothing but a claim that never paid out and a mule that was half dead itself. But he gave us his last jar of honey, his blanket, and he sat with May for 3 nights while the fever raged. James's expression softened. Samuel saved her life, Rose continued. And when Mama tried to thank him, tried to offer him something, anything, he just shook his head and said, ain't no account needed for doing what's right. She looked directly at James. That's why I helped you, Mr. Calloway. Because I remember what it feels like to be invisible, to be judged as worthless because your pockets are empty, and I swore I'd never be the person who looks away. Silence settled between them, heavy with understanding. James leaned forward slightly. What happened to Samuel? Died the following spring, Rose said quietly. Never struck it rich, never got his name on anything, but he mattered. He mattered to us. James nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. My wife used to say something similar. She'd say, Jim, all the land and money in the world won't mean a damn thing if your soul stays poor. He paused, his voice thickening. She grew up in poverty, you see. Her father was a sharecropper. She knew hunger, knew shame, knew what it meant to be invisible, and when I met her, I was just a railroad worker with big dreams and empty pockets. Rose watched him carefully. She saw something in me, he continued, believed in me when no one else did, helped me build everything I have, and when she died, he trailed off, collecting himself. When she died, I realized I'd spent so much time building an empire that I'd forgotten to build connections, real ones. So you went searching, Rose said softly. For 2 years, he confirmed, searching for someone who reminded me of her. Someone who understood that wealth isn't measured in gold, but in character. He reached across the table, stopping just short of her hand. I'm not asking you for anything, Miss McKenna, but I would like to know you better, not as a benefactor, not as an employer, just as someone who recognizes a kindred spirit. Rose looked at his hand, then at his face, at the genuine loneliness etched in the lines around his eyes. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Calloway, she said. Perhaps not, he replied, but perhaps my world needs people like you more than you know. 3 days later, Rose stood on the platform of the Redemption Gulch railway station, a worn leather satchel in her hand, and her heart hammering against her ribs. James had sent a letter the day before, a simple invitation to accompany him to Santa Fe and beyond. No obligations, he'd written, just an opportunity to see a different side of the territory. and perhaps to help me see it differently too. May had insisted she go, despite Rose's protests. "You've spent your whole life taking care of me," May had said, propped up on her pillows, looking stronger than she had in weeks. "Maybe it's time someone took care of you for a change, even if it's just for a little while." Now, as the train whistle pierced the morning air, Rose wondered if she'd made a mistake. Then she saw him. James stood beside a modest passenger car, not the luxury carriage she'd expected, but something simple, almost ordinary. He wore a plain shirt and vest, his Stetson shading his eyes from the early sun. When he saw her, his face brightened. "Miss McKenna, I wasn't certain you'd come." "Neither was I," she admitted. He smiled. "Then I'm glad you took the chance." The journey began quietly. As the train rolled through the Arizona landscape, past red mesas and sprawling desert, through small settlements and vast empty spaces, they talked, really talked. Not about money or business, but about books. James had an entire collection of dime novels he wasn't ashamed to admit he loved. Rose confessed she'd taught herself to read using old newspapers and the Bible. They talked about music. James had seen opera houses in San Francisco. Rose had only ever heard the out-of-tune piano at the Saloon, but she described the songs her mother used to sing, and James listened like she was recounting symphonies. But the real revelation came when they reached their first stop, a small settlement called Painted Rock. James led her to a modest building on the edge of town, a wooden structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Painted Rock Children's Home." The moment they stepped inside, children swarmed James, not with the formality of meeting a wealthy benefactor, but with the pure joy of seeing someone they loved. "Mr. Jim," a little girl squealed, wrapping her arms around his leg. "You came back," a boy shouted, waving a carved wooden horse. "Look, I finished it like you showed me." Rose watched in amazement as James knelt down, examining the horse with genuine interest, ruffling hair, remembering names, asking about schoolwork and chores. The woman who ran the home, a weathered but kind-faced lady named Mrs. Patterson, pulled Rose aside. "He comes 4 times a year," she said quietly. "Never announces himself, just shows up, spends time with the children, fixes what needs fixing. Built this whole place with his own money, but you'd never know it from how he acts." Rose looked back at James, who was now being dragged toward a corner where children wanted to show him their drawings. "He doesn't want gratitude," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Just wants to know they're cared for. Says every child deserves to feel like they matter." Over the next 2 weeks, Rose saw this pattern repeat itself across the territory. They visited a cattle ranch where James had quietly bought the land and leased it back to a family who'd lost everything in a drought. He didn't stay in the main house. He bunked with the ranch hands, sharing meals and stories around the fire. They stopped at a way station where an elderly couple barely scraped by. James had been paying their property taxes for years without them knowing. He simply showed up, helped repair their roof, and left before they could thank him properly. In a mining town, they met a group of widows whose husbands had died in a collapse. James had established a fund that paid them monthly, but he'd never put his name on it. "Why don't you tell them?" Rose asked one evening as they sat on the porch of a small boarding house, watching the sunset paint the desert gold. "Because then it becomes about me," James said simply. "The moment they know, everything changes. They start treating me like someone I'm not." He turned to her. "With you, I don't have to be James Calloway, land baron. I can just be Jim, a man trying to figure out if his life has meant something beyond ledgers and deeds." Rose looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the wealthy magnate, but the lonely widower still searching for connection. "It has," she said softly. "It absolutely has." They returned to Redemption Gulch on a Thursday evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert. The journey had changed something in Rose. She walked taller, spoke with more certainty, saw the world through eyes that had been open to possibilities she'd never imagined. But she also knew she was still Rose McKenna, the saloon girl with a sick sister and 4 bits to her name. James had arranged to meet her the following day at the hotel, the nicest building in town, a place Rose had never set foot inside. She arrived wearing her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and found him waiting in a private sitting room. On the table between 2 chairs sat a leather portfolio, official-looking and intimidating. "Please sit," James said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Rose sat, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating fast. James opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table. "I've had my lawyers draw this up," he said. "It's a trust. The McKenna Women's Fund. It would provide resources for women in circumstances like yours, working women, women caring for sick family, women who've been overlooked and undervalued." Rose's eyes widened as she scanned the document. The numbers made her dizzy. "You'd be the director," James continued. "You'd decide who receives help, how much, and when. My name wouldn't appear anywhere on it. This would be yours to build, yours to shape." Rose looked up at him, overwhelmed. "Mr. Calloway, I don't know what to say. There's more," he said gently. He slid another document across. "This is a deed to a property here in Redemption Gulch. It's yours. A home for you and May. No rent, no landlord. Just yours." Rose's hands trembled as she touched the paper. "And this," James said, producing a final envelope, "is a letter of credit. Enough to ensure May receives the best medical care available. Doctors, medicine, whatever she needs." Rose couldn't breathe. Tears welled in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you saw me when I was invisible," James said simply. "And because I want to see you finally free from the burdens you've carried alone for so long." For a long moment, Rose sat in silence, staring at the documents that represented more security than she'd ever dreamed possible. A future without fear, without struggle, without choosing between dignity and survival. Then, slowly, she pushed the documents back across the table. James's brow furrowed. Rose dash. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Why not?" he asked, genuine confusion in his eyes. Rose took a shaky breath. "Because if I take this, I become someone who needed saving. And that's not who I am." She wiped her eyes. "You've shown me something these past weeks, Mr. Calloway. You've shown me that the greatest wealth isn't what you have. It's what you do with it, how you use it to lift others without diminishing them." James started to speak, but she held up her hand. "I don't want to be your project," she said firmly. "I don't want to be the woman you rescued. I want to be the woman who built something herself, even if it's smaller, even if it takes longer." She touched the deed gently. "But I will accept one thing. The home, not for me, but for May. She deserves a safe place to heal. That I'll take, for her." James leaned back, studying her face. Then, slowly, something extraordinary happened. He smiled, not with disappointment, but with unmistakable pride. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "I'm stubborn," Rose corrected. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He gathered the other documents, folding them carefully. "What will you do?" Rose stood, smoothing her dress. "I'm going to save my money. I'm going to work. And someday, when I'm ready, I'm going to open a place of my own. Somewhere folks can come and be treated with dignity, whether they've got a dollar or a dime." She met his eyes. "And I'm going to do it myself. Because that's what your wife would have done, isn't it?" James stood as well, his eyes glistening. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "Yes, it is." He extended his hand. "Friends?" Rose took it, feeling the strength in his grip matching her own. "Friends." As she turned to leave, James called after her. "Rose?" She looked back. "I'll be watching," he said. "Not to interfere, just to witness, because I have a feeling what you build is going to be worth seeing." Rose smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. I reckon it will be. 2 years passed like seasons changing on the frontier, slow, steady, and transforming everything in their path. Rose worked harder than she ever had, saving every spare coin, taking extra shifts, mending clothes by candlelight long after May had fallen asleep. The home James had given them became a sanctuary where May slowly, miraculously, regained her strength. And then, one autumn morning, Rose stood across the street from her dream made real. The building was modest, a converted general store on the corner of Main Street and Cedar, but it was hers. Every nail, every board, every window pane paid for with her own sweat and savings. Above the door, a newly painted sign swung gently in the desert breeze. The Open Range Cafe. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Everyone deserves a seat at the table." Inside, the cafe glowed with warmth. Mismatched tables and chairs, some donated, some bought secondhand, filled the space. The walls were bare wood, decorated only with simple frames containing handwritten words: dignity, kindness, belonging. Behind the counter, a chalkboard menu didn't list prices. Instead, it read, "Pay what you can. If you can't, the meal's on us. No questions, no shame." Rose had hired 2 people, May, now healthy enough to work the counter, and a young man named Wesley, a former drifter who'd shown up hungry and left with purpose. The doors opened at sunrise, and within an hour, every seat was filled. Ranchers and railroad workers sat beside widows and wanderers. Children ate pancakes while their mothers finally rested. An old prospector nursed his coffee in the corner, his dignity intact because no one asked if he could pay. Rose moved through the cafe with quiet grace, refilling cups, clearing plates, and most importantly, seeing people, really seeing them. It was mid-morning when the door opened and a figure stepped inside that made Rose's breath catch. A young man, no more than 20, stood in the doorway. His clothes were tattered, his face sunburned, his hands trembling. He looked around nervously, like a wild animal ready to bolt. Wesley, behind the counter, crossed his arms. "Morning. You looking to order?" The young man swallowed hard. I don't have any money. I just thought maybe I could sit for a spell, get out of the sun." Wesley's expression hardened. "Look, friend, this is a business. We can't just—" "Wesley." Rose's voice cut through the moment, firm but gentle. She crossed the cafe floor and stood beside the young man, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, welcome to the Open Range," she said warmly. "Would you like a seat by the window?" The young man's eyes widened, glistening with surprise and relief. Yes, ma'am, thank you." Rose guided him to the table by the window, the very same spot where, years ago, an old drifter had sat with a plate of eggs and a stranger's kindness. "What would you like this morning?" she asked. "Anything warm," he whispered. "I ain't eaten in 2 days." Rose smiled. "Then let's make it a good meal. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee. Sound good?" He nodded, unable to speak. As Rose turned toward the kitchen, she caught Wesley's confused expression. She pulled him aside gently. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "There's going to be folks who come in here with nothing, and when they do, you treat them like they're the most important person in the room, because they are. Understand?" Wesley nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm sorry. I just thought—" "I know what you thought," Rose said. "But this place isn't just about food. It's about reminding people they matter." She glanced back at the young man by the window. "Sometimes that's worth more than any meal we could serve." Outside, across the dusty street, a figure stood beneath the awning of the general store. James Calloway, dressed simply in a work shirt and worn vest, watched through the window. He saw Rose bring the plate to the young man, saw the gratitude in the stranger's eyes, saw the beginning of a cycle he knew would continue long after both of them were gone. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He simply tipped his hat to the cafe, to Rose, to the legacy she was building, and turned to walk away. But before he did, He whispered into the morning air, words meant for no one but himself and perhaps the memory of his wife. You were right, darling. Kindness is the only wealth that multiplies when you give it away. Inside the cafe, Rose returned to her work, unaware she was being watched, unaware that miles away in Santa Fe, James had already begun quietly funding 5 more cafes just like hers across the territory, each one bearing a different name, each one built on the same principle. And as the young man by the window took his first bite, tears streaming down his weathered face, Rose understood something profound. She hadn't just fed a stranger, she'd honored a promise, continued a legacy, and proven that the truest form of wealth wasn't what you kept. It was what you gave away when you had every reason not to. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Arizona territory, where a simple act of kindness between a saloon girl and a stranger became a legacy that would echo through generations. Rose McKenna didn't need a fortune to change lives. She just needed the courage to see people when the world refused to look. If this story stirred something in you, reminded you of the power we all hold to make a difference, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you stories that prove the greatest adventures aren't found in gold or glory, but in the quiet moments when we choose compassion over comfort. We'll see you on the next trail where another soul waits to be seen.